I'm not sure if you guys can hear that, but the recording is now in progress, just so everyone knows. We are recording the session. We put these up on our YouTube afterwards. But thank you all so much for joining me for our Skill Gym session on how to run a design sprint. My name's Matt. I work for a company called Skills of the Modern Age. And I'll start by doing a quick little intro to the session and sharing my screen with you all. So just bear with me for one moment. All right, so this is our Skill Gym session, as I said, on how to run a design sprint. Thanks all so much for making the time in your busy days and your busy schedules to join us for the next 90 minutes to learn a little bit about the design sprint methodology and how you guys can apply it in your own work. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I know that there'll be plenty of others joining us from Noongar country, but also others from around the country and maybe even some from outside of Australia as well. But even still important to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where all of us are joining the call from. We've been trying to connect our acknowledgements of country to the Noongar seasons that we're in. And those of us who are in Perth are very aware that we're still in the rainy Makaroo season today. Hopefully almost at the end of it. So yeah, the beautiful sort of Jilba and the start of spring coming very soon, but definitely feeling the cold, feeling the wet today. As I said, my name's Matt Norman and I work for this bunch. We're called Skills of the Modern Age. We are an organization, call ourselves a design and innovation company. We do lots of different workshops, lots of capacity building with all kinds of different clients and organizations. So from really big sort of corporate and government clients all the way through to really small sort of community organizations and not-for-profits. But all of our work is focused on helping people to get excited about the future of work and helping people to do good in the world through innovation as well. Let me just make sure I'm letting everyone in as they arrive. So this session is going to be about how to run a design sprint. And for those of you who have done design sprints or some design work before, you might already be a little bit familiar with what this looks like, and you're hoping to sort of brush up on some design skills or get some tips about how to facilitate them. Some of you might be completely new to the design world, and that's totally fair as well. What we like to do at Skills of the Modern Age is to keep it super interactive and super fast-paced. So the first thing that I'm going to invite you guys to do is a bit of an icebreaker that we've designed that's called the elevator pitch. And we've designed this to give you a bit of a taste of what the design process looks like. Before I tell you too much about design and design sprints, this will hopefully give you a sort of experience and a taste of the design sprint before we jump in. So the idea with elevator pitch is that you've got a couple of different cards that match up, and it's a little bit like Cards Against Humanity for those of you who've played that before, but a PC version. We've taken all the rude bits out, and it's Cards Against Humanity meets something like Shark Tank or Dragon's Den. So you have a black problem card and a white customer card. And the idea is to try and come up with a fictional product, service, or solution that solves that particular problem for that particular customer. So the example on this slide here is getting the smell of onion off your breath for Elon Musk's personal assistant. You might come up with an idea that is a little tin of mints in the shape of your Tesla Cybertrucks, so that you can get the smell of onion off your breath, but also impress your boss by showing him that you're repping the company product at the same time. So two birds with one stone. It's all about trying to tailor your solution to the particular needs and experience of that particular person. The very exciting thing for you guys is that we've got a new set of elevator pitch coming out. So for those of you who already know it, who have already been using it, we've got a whole new deck with all new cards coming up very soon, and we're going to be testing some of those with you today. So I'm going to open up some breakout rooms very shortly, but this is going to be the problem and customer combination for you guys in the room today. What I want you to do is see if you can come up with a fictional product, service, or solution that helps Darth Vader to reduce his carbon footprint. Are there any questions about how the game is going to work before I open up these breakout rooms? Feel free to jump off mute because I can't see everyone. If you do have any questions. Awesome. All right, the trick is you're only going to have 3 minutes to come up with your fictional product, service, or solution. All right, so 3 minutes in your groups trying to reduce your carbon footprint for Darth Vader. Best of luck, and I'll see you soon. All right, welcome back. Welcome back all. I would love to hear some of the awesome ideas that you guys came up with. So I want you to give me a quick hands up if you came up with something pretty decent for helping Darth Vader to reduce his carbon footprint. And then I'll select a couple of people who can share with the group. Beth, and I saw your finger go off. I'll start with you. Go for it.
I was pre-nominated. We are offering an intergalactic carbon footprint reduction product, especially for Darth Vader, which is offset your Death Star, because although while traveling space, time, whatever, the universe, you might not be producing that much carbon, it might not even be an issue, but the making of that Death Star was a ridiculous carbon footprint that really needs to be offset immediately.
Fantastic. Offsets for the Death Star. Love it. I saw a hand up from Brandon. If you wanted to jump in, what was your idea that your group came up with?
Yes. Okay. So our stuff was focused on the machines, the spaceships, that sort of thing, and even the lightsabers. So the lightsabers that Darth Vader's got, we figured, they can be made from more environmentally friendly materials, and the stuff that powers the engine. So, the fuel and everything, there's a lot of waste and a lot of stuff going out there. If we can choose something, because there's heaps of planets in the Star Wars universe. So surely one of them, if not looked into already, will have something that, maybe the dirt or something from a plant or something, we can extract something there, power that through the engines, and it can be a little bit more eco-efficient there, eco-friendly, and potentially, depending on what's in like the plant's dirt, for example, when it comes out of the exhaust from the spaceships, it could even be good to the environment. It might improve the air quality, something like that. So that's really what we got there. Yeah.
Love your work. All right. Looking for alternative sort of lower emission fuels throughout the galaxy.
Pretty much. Yeah.
We'll go for one more. Alvin, do you want to jump in?
We came up with, they're probably still carbon reducing depending on how you look at it. Well, you could harvest stars and use those to power your Death Star. You could replace your troops with robots, because then you probably don't need to feed them. We all know how that turned out, though. He could probably just destroy the planet with his Death Star, then he wouldn't have to worry about its carbon footprint.
There are some darker solutions there, but some very creative thinking going on throughout all of the groups. So well done there. And Asher, that is a fantastic helmet. I'm not sure where you've gone now, but very, very impressive bringing that onto the call. Well done. So that, as I said, is our elevator pitch game. And the idea of that one is to give you guys a chance to sort of experience kind of what a miniature design sprint looks like in the space of only about 3 minutes with your groups. So already you've gone through this really rapid process of sort of identifying a particular problem, empathizing with the customer that you're designing for, coming up with hopefully a range of different solutions, and then selecting one of the solutions that you would like to put forward, and even getting a bit of feedback from the group when you sort of saw how people reacted as you pitched your idea at the end as well. So already you've been through a kind of miniature design sprint process, and we're now going to talk a little bit more about what a design sprint actually looks like. So for the rest of the workshop, I'm going to share a little bit about what design sprints look like from a SOMA perspective. And we've been helping different kinds of organizations to run design sprints in different kinds of ways across our sort of last 3 years of working in this design and innovation space. And I am also going to give you guys a chance individually, and then sharing a little bit in smaller groups, to plan out how could design sprints help you within your organization and your work to solve different kinds of problems, and what might your sort of first design sprint or your next design sprint, if you're already a sprinter, look like based on the stuff that we go through in the workshop today. So if you haven't already, you might have seen in the intro email that we're going to be doing some pen and paper activities. So try and have something to write with and something to write on next to you, that you can always open up a Word document or something like that if that works better for you. All right. So I'm going to share my screen with you again. this will probably be the part of the workshop where I talk at you for the longest, so I apologize for that in advance. But this will be me introducing a little bit what we're talking about when we talk about design sprints, and then you guys will get stuck into some activities that are a bit more hands-on. So to start with a bit of a definition of what we mean by design sprint. For us, a design sprint is a structured, focused, and time-bound design process that's aimed at getting validated results quickly. And so we've chosen those words quite carefully. Structured is really important because the design sprint follows a particular kind of structure. There's a bit of flexibility to the structure in terms of what activities you use at each of the different stages, but the sort of stages that you go through in a design sprint are typically reasonably structured or sort of predetermined. And so we're going to share with you a bit of a general structure for what a design sprint looks like, and then give you a bit of a chance to think about, with the flexibility that I have, what kinds of activities would make most sense for the context that I'm working in or the purpose that I'm using a design sprint for. Design sprints are focused and they're time bound, which are the other two really important words there. So typically a design sprint is done when you gather a team together who are working on a particular challenge, and you clear your schedules. You give them a set amount of time and get rid of everything else that's in their calendars, everything else that might be distracting them, and give them permission to focus just on that particular problem for a set amount of time. So a week is the typical sort of starting point as a design sprint, but there are lots of different ways that you can sort of flexibly structure those design sprints as well, and we'll talk about that. But the idea is that you've got a group of people together and you've got this one singular focus on a particular problem, which is what enables you to get those validated results quickly. And the validated results piece is all about including the voice of the customer in that design sprint as well. So it's thinking about who are the people that I'm designing for, whether it's my end users, whether it's collaborators who I might need to work with to deliver this thing, whether it's stakeholders or experts whose input I might need to get when I'm designing this solution, whatever it is. How can I make sure that their voices are involved in the room? So involving them in the research and understanding piece at the start of a design sprint, and involving them in getting feedback on whatever it is I designed by the end of the design sprint as well. So this book by Jake Knapp called Sprint is one of the things that really popularized this idea of design sprints. So Jake Knapp and team worked at Google Ventures to sort of support different startups. It was Google's way of supporting different startups to sort of understand what their customer product fit looked like and sort of build products up from a really early idea stage to something that was validated and something that was ready for investment and ready to scale. And so they put together this book that sort of went through the structured process that they'd worked out, really worked across 5 days to get people from a sort of big idea or a big problem through to something that had been validated or invalidated, as it might be. So I'm going to start with sort of showing you their 5-day process. But as I said, this is kind of a starting point, and we're going to then open up our thinking after that and think about, well, design sprints can be 5 days, but they can also be done in different kinds of structures. We can break that up. We can have repeat sprints, and we can structure it in lots of different kinds of ways. But the idea here is that you've got a 5-day design sprint. And as I said, you're gathering a team together to work on one challenge with all the other distractions that are cleared away for them. So on the first day, you might make a map of the current problem, so understanding a little bit about what's going on currently and choosing a target. So that's really defining your problem, reframing it, and understanding what particular part of this challenge are we really going to focus on in this sprint. On the Tuesday and Wednesday, you're starting to come up with some ideas for different solutions, building out those ideas and deciding on which idea you're going to move forward with and actually test. On the Thursday, you're building a realistic prototype of that idea. And for those who haven't come across prototyping before, what that means is making your idea tangible and real in some way. So you're kind of building a first draft, if you like, of the idea, so that rather than telling people about your idea, you can actually build something real that you can put in their hands and say, hey, this is what we built to try and solve this problem for you. Are we on the right track? And that's what you're doing on the Friday, which is when you start to test with your target customers and the people that you've designed this thing for. And you say, hey, here's what we've actually designed. What do you think about it? Are we actually solving the right problem? Is this something that you would use? Is it something that you would pay for if that's relevant? And what are the challenges with it? What do you think we might need to improve on as well? Now, there are a range of different things that a sprint can do for you. The design sprint process that Jake Knapp and co talk about is largely focused on sort of product design processes and a little bit on process design as well. So thinking about services and the kinds of solutions that are involved there. But there are a range of different things that that sprints can do as well. You might have a visioning sprint, which is more about getting on the same page and working out a sort of core shared vision and understanding of where you're trying to get to, whether that's within a team or within an organization. You might have a kickoff sprint for a particular project, which is sort of getting people on board and making sure everyone understands what the project is trying to achieve and what they're going to be responsible for. You might have a brand sprint, which is all about trying to come up with a sort of visual look and feel for what is going to represent your brand. There are a range of different things that sprints might be designed towards, but all of them have that same structure of understanding the problem at the front end, coming up with a range of different solutions, and then validating or invalidating the ideas that you've come up with by prototyping and testing those ideas and solutions all in a really short space of time, so that rather than spending 6 months on a project and then finding out that your ideas aren't quite on the right track, you've spent a week on it, but you've got some really good results in a really short space of time. We wanted to share this one as well, which we think is really interesting. Enterprise Design Associates have got this great sort of typology, if you like, of the different kinds of purposes that you might have for a design sprint. So they've broken it up based on whether your focus is on questions or is on answers, and whether it's a visionary or an applied approach. So if you're in that sort of visionary space, your focus on questions might be an engagement sprint. So that's really trying to define a problem at the front end and trying to understand, engage with customers and users and understand what the big questions are and what the big problems are. Or if your focus is on answers in that visionary space, that's when you're doing a sort of strategy or vision sprint that I already spoke about. And then in the applied space, it's more focused on sort of concrete, tangible things. So you might be doing an experimentation sprint to sort of generate and validate different options for solutions, or you might be focusing on that answer. You've got some ideas and you're actually building a real prototype of a solution, which is more of that sort of traditional the traditional sprint style, which is where you're building a solution, you're putting it in the hands of your customers, and you're gathering some of their feedback on whether that's working for them. So I want to talk a little bit as well about what kind of context we might choose to run a design sprint in and why they've sort of come about as a really popular way of going about design processes before I throw it back to you guys to have a bit of a chat in some smaller groups. So a lot of you would have come across this concept of the VUCA world, but for those who haven't, it's the idea that increasingly in the modern world, we're living with a whole lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in the kind of context that we're working in and in the kind of problems that we're trying to solve in our work. So in this kind of context, it's really important to be able to use something like a design sprint to really rapidly experiment your way towards solutions and sort of through the complexity that you're working in. So design sprints are a way that, as I said, instead of spending a whole lot of time trying to gather perfect information, which is rarely possible in a VUCA world, and trying to make sure that you have sort of pre-validated an idea and you know that it's going to work before you launch it into the world, which again is rarely possible, if ever. The idea of a design sprint is, let's not try and get it perfect. Let's just launch it at a sort of 50% version or a 60% version. Let's get something out there into the world as quickly as we can. And let's get some feedback from the people who are actually going to be using this thing, because then we can find out really quickly and relatively cheaply whether we're on the right track or not. And that's the real value of design sprints, is that it avoids a whole lot of time and money and energy spent on really big, expensive projects that might fail by testing and validating those ideas quickly and cheaply at the front end. So to give a quick example of one of the sort of the classic case studies from the world of design sprints, WeWork is a big co-working company globally who ran a design sprint on a particular challenge which was focused on on-demand space booking. So WeWork's typical model is that they have people sign up for a membership. They might have a sort of a hot desk, or they might have a particular desk that's sort of dedicated to them or their team. but they've got an ongoing commitment to the brand and an ongoing membership. And what we were seeing was that lots of their competitors were doing on-demand space booking. So that was where people might book in just for one day or for half a day to run a workshop or a team retreat or something like that. And they wanted to do this design sprint to work out whether that model might work for them as well. So in that initial part of the design sprint, what they did was actually book a competitor space for a day for day one of the sprint. So it was a really interesting way of actually making their idea and their problem real, gathering some feedback on how other people are tackling this challenge by actually going through the process that one of their competitors had designed. They decided on the rebooking piece as one of the most important elements of their challenge. And they came up with the range of different ideas and did some sort of low fidelity prototyping of those ideas. They got some feedback, and this was a great example of needing to actually be flexible with the structure of a design sprint, because what they found was they got a whole lot of critical feedback, but there was still some questions that they wanted to answer. So they did a repeat sprint, which was to sort of iterate on their idea, build some higher fidelity prototypes, incorporate some of the feedback they got from their clients and their users. And what the end result of that process was that they actually invalidated the idea for the time being. And it seems like that might be called a failure or a failed design sprint, because they worked out that their idea wasn't actually going to work. But the value of design sprints and the idea of trying to validate or invalidate your ideas through a design sprint is that because they'd gone through this process in a really rapid space of only a few weeks, they'd avoided a whole lot of time and money spent on doing a live launch of a great big new on-demand booking product for it then to fail once they'd launched it in a much more expensive and a much more sort of public and embarrassing way. So this is the value of design sprints, is being able to either validate your idea and know that you can be a little bit more sure it's going to work, or finding out that it's not going to work before it's a big expensive failure. So that is plenty of me talking at you. As I said, what I'm going to do now is send you out into some breakout rooms. I'm going to shuffle up the rooms a little bit so you'll have a chance to talk to some different people and hopefully meet some new faces. But in your rooms, what I want you to think about is, within your organization, within your team or the work that you do, what are some of the big problems or challenges that you think design sprints could help you to solve? Do you think it's in that vision and strategy space? Is it in the sort of branding space and the sort of visual design? Is it in product or service design? Or is there something completely different that you think design sprints could be really helpful for you to focus on? And the reason I want you to have this conversation is because across the rest of the workshop, you're going to be starting to design a sprint for either your first sprint or your next sprint if you're someone who's already doing sprints. So it's thinking about, all right, what are the problems that I would like to focus on in that particular sprint process? Sounds good? Awesome. All right, I'll send you out into these breakout rooms now, and I look forward to seeing you soon. All right, here we all are. Awesome. All righty. Once again, would love to hear what are some of those big problems in your own organizations that you think sprints might be able to help you out with, even if you're not 100% sure on what this whole sprint thing is yet and how you might run one. Does anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to jump in and share what they were thinking in their groups? You can even throw someone else under the bus if they had an interesting problem that a sprint might be helpful for in someone's organization. Oh, sorry, go for it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I can't find my hand up thing. I was just going to say, I was talking to the guys in my breakout room and saying around kickoff, because I'm a consultant, and I think kickoff is so particularly important to help define the actual problem. So you've already got a scope of work, you've been engaged by a client, but in fact, what someone says that they want and need is not necessarily what they want and need. The problem that they think they have is not necessarily that. And so I think I'd like to get better. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to do this because, I was saying to them, no one's going to pay for that time. But is making sure that that kickoff, how we're going to approach it, how we're going to early show back, so that basically, you know, that they can work out very quickly that there's maybe a gap between what they think that they need and what they actually, or what they want and what they actually need. And so that you can confirm those, so that by the time you get to the end of the project, in fact, you're not having questions about scopes of work and why wasn't this delivered, because you know that you've pivoted the whole way through and that you've had an agreement to do that. So that's my one.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that case, you're probably in that tricky situation where you've almost got two sets of customers or users that you're designing for. One of them is the actual users, and then one of them is the client, because you obviously need to sort of get them both on the same page around what's this project trying to achieve. So hopefully trying to work that into the way that you're designing the sprint as well. Margaret, I saw your hand go up. Did you want to share a little bit as well?
Yes, I was just saying that I think the design sprint could solve any problem. It's just whether, like, how long or short it is. You know, so you could have a design sprint about what kind of snacks you're going to order for the office. And it could be like a half an hour one, but it could also have complex problems. Like the challenge that sort of I've found in the past is getting people on longer sprints.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can, I think, break a problem maybe into smaller sprints, perhaps that's a better way to do it. And then whatever your problem is, like really frame it into parts like that. Yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things to pull out there. I think, yeah, the first one in terms of making the sprints actually work in the real world is, yeah, what you've just suggested is really, really valuable. And I think what we actually see in a lot of the organizations that we're working with is that you can rarely get, you know, 5 people with important jobs into the same room and with nothing else sort of distracting them for an entire week. That's pretty tricky. But working out how you can do it sort of 1 or 2 days at a time, and maybe do, you know, a kickoff sprint, and then you've got to work out how to do some research and go away and do some surveys and interviews and things like that, and then come back for a problem definition and reframing sprint, and then go away and do some ideation and prototyping, and then come back and do, you know, a testing sprint or whatever it might be. That's often more how we see that work. And then to your point around the sort of the size of a challenge that a design sprint can tackle, it's a really interesting one, and it's a topic of a lot of debate among designers. I think design sprints are typically designed for something that is sort of bite-sized to an extent. And you're probably right in that, you know, the longer the process, the more you can tackle. But I suppose beyond a certain length, it tends not to, it's harder to conceptualize that as a sprint anymore, because it's more of just like a design project. So yeah, when you say sort of a big complex process, if you imagine a design sprint to solve climate change, it's not really going to be at a speed that you could call a sprint anymore. So I think typically the sort of general agreement is that it's below a certain level or threshold of complexity and size, but where that threshold is definitely a matter for debate. Was there anyone else who wanted to jump in and share some of the problems that they'd been thinking about, or the applications of design sprints, before we move on? Jack, go for it.
Cool, I'll quickly go. Just 2 things. First one, Lara, you can do kickoff sprints. I've been doing it for the last 2 years, and they're awesome. And then number 2 is anyone interested? If I was thinking of looking at events today, doing event sprints, who would be interested? Raise your hand if we were to have a process or half-day session to get everything organized for your event. Just raise your hand if you're keen on that.
Kind of event, Jack?
Pardon?
What kind of event?
Oh, your own events. So a sprint process for you to map out your own events and get everything booked in the half day with your team.
Jack's just jumping in to do some sales while he's got a second. Looks like you've got plenty of interest there. Definitely.
Okay, sweet. That's good enough for me to work on it in this session.
I've got a question.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry.
Our group had a number of different ideas about how they would use them in practice. A few of us were in the non-profit sector, and we're looking at, you know, sort of rolling out new processes and testing them before we had to spend too much money and too much time. I'm really curious to see if this type of process can assist with a kind of selection of a product, an existing product that is off the shelf. You know, I can't really get my head around how you could use that, but I'd like to find out if it's possible.
Yeah, for sure. Before I jump in, did anyone in the call, has anyone had experience with that and wanted to jump in as to whether you can sort of choose products using a sprint? No one jumping in off the top of their heads. Yeah, so I think it definitely could be something that could work, and it's the case of thinking about how you would do that prototyping piece. So the sort of research piece at the front is relatively simple around understanding what your needs are. So you're the customers that you need to empathize with at the front end there, and then obviously researching what the different options are. But I think prototyping and making it real for people what it would look like to use each of those solutions is going to be the really tricky piece there. So it's thinking about how you can, whether it's, you know, making sort of basic prototypes of those of the different products themselves in-house, so that then you can get people testing them and sort of saying, you know, this is what it would be like to use product A versus product B, and getting feedback on that. But I think that's probably the most challenging piece there, is working out how you would authentically and sort of validate those through the prototyping and testing process. But definitely an interesting question.
Okay,
all right, folks, we'll move on, and I'll share with you a little bit about the sort of pre-sprint process. So before you jump into a design sprint, there's a few things that we recommend doing to sort of prepare for your sprint and make sure that you're set up for success. There's probably a lot more than just 3 of them, but these are our sort of 3 top tips that we want to focus on in the call today, given we've just got you for 90 minutes. So the 3 that we're going to quickly run through are establishing a clear purpose tied to your broader strategy. So making sure that you've got a really clear sense of what are we doing this for and what exactly are we trying to achieve by the end of this sprint. Assembling your sprint team, and then making room for the sprint in terms of both space and time, which we've talked about a little bit already as well. So in terms of that purpose piece, it all comes back to that sort of classic statement of starting with why, starting with understanding what the purpose is of this sprint and what are you actually trying to achieve. And in particular with a design sprint, it's thinking about not just your purpose in a broader sense and sort of tying it to your strategy, but it's also getting some real clarity on your desired outcomes, because the desired outcomes are going to be really determined by the people that you've got in the room and the amount of time that you're able to put towards the sprint as well. Not necessarily determined by it. Those might determine the purpose, and the purpose might determine those, but they're going to be in relationship with one another. So it's really important to get clear on what the purpose and the sort of desired outcomes are. A bigger outcome is obviously going to require more people and more time to get something that can actually validate your idea or get you towards some sort of validated vision or brand or whatever it might be. So it's really important there to get that clarity within your team. The next piece is around building a team. So we've got a bit of a Ocean's 8, or for those of you who are Ocean's fans, the classic trope of searching around and working out how you can pull together a team who have got all the different kinds of skills that you might need. So really importantly here, what we recommend is not just doing a design sprint solely within a design or innovation team. If you're working in a bigger organization and you've got that kind of team, it's really valuable to work with all of the people who actually touch on whatever process it is that you're designing. So we've done quite a few sprints that are around recruitment processes. And when you're looking at recruitment, you're getting the sort of HR team involved and the people who are actually running the recruitment process, but you're also getting the marketing team involved, and you're getting the IT team who actually need to set that person up on the system and the technology. And you're getting the sort of managers or leaders who need to make final decisions on hiring. And you're getting all of those different kinds of people who touch on that process in lots of different kinds of ways. Because once you've got all of those people in the room, you've got all of these different perspectives that you can put into your design sprint. And it can be really, really helpful, because someone in the, in management might say, well, this bit needs to be quicker and we need to be turning that around faster. And then someone in the IT team can say, well, the reason that doesn't turn around faster is because we have to do this and you never give us the right information. And then you can actually find out where those sticking points are in a process. Plus, you can actually work out a really, really realistic prototype of your solution, because everyone who would actually have to deliver that solution is there in the room and involved in the sprint. So picking a team really wisely is really key there. And then the last piece is, again, going back to this piece around making room for your sprint, both in terms of time and in terms of space. So oftentimes it can be really valuable to actually get out of your regular office environment and sort of find yourself a space where you feel like you're not actually connected to day-to-day work and the sort of business as usual, but also making sure that as much as you possibly can, you're stripping away all those other distractions so that you give that team permission to focus on this one challenge. As we said, this sort of 5-day sprint all at once might not be realistic, but it's thinking about how can we make sure that we've got some level of sort of protected time and space to really give people that, that permission to focus. So for this next activity, what I'm going to encourage you to do is individually at first, get a piece of paper that you brought with you, or you can do it, as I said, digitally if that works for you. But if you've got a piece of paper, turn it sideways and divide it into 3 sections, just like you see here. And across the top, you want to put purpose, team, and making room. And the idea here is to start thinking individually about, firstly, what's the purpose of this sprint and what are the desired outcomes that I'm looking for? Secondly, who needs to be on that sprint team with me? And thirdly, how will I make room for this design sprint, whether that's in terms of the time that you're carving out, the space that you're using, any of the permission that you might need to get from higher ups, any of the funding that you might need, all of those sorts of questions. So thinking about your previous conversation with your groups, what kind of challenge might you need to design, focus on for a design sprint? What kind of problem can a design sprint help you solve? And then starting to answer these 3 questions. What's the purpose? Who needs to be on the team? And how are you going to make room for it? I'll give you a few minutes to work on this individually, as I said, and then you'll have a chance to have a bit of a chat about it with your teams as well. Any questions on how it's going to work? Awesome. Legends, take it away. I'll put on some music. If you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and then we'll have a chance to share with teams shortly, as I said. Go for it.
Is there really such a hole, or did they just tell me so? Hang my head or leave my soul, the only road I've ever known. Down with the kicks, don't carry no load, where the angels live in the world. No world with my head in outer space. I know I'll be A-O-A-OK. I know I'll be A-O-A-OK. When I see trouble come my way, I'll be making lemonade. I know I'll be A-O-A-OK.
All right, welcome back.
I know I'll be A-O-A-OK.
All right. Hopefully you've had a chance to share a little bit of your sprint plan. You starting to get excited about what possibilities a sprint might open up for you in your work. The next thing that we're going to talk about is how do we actually structure the sprint itself, depending on the kind of people who are going to be involved, depending on the particular purpose and outcomes that I'm actually trying to get out of the sprint. So I'm going to share my screen with you again and talk you through a little bit of our thinking around this. Now, when we're doing our facilitation training, this is a really similar framework to what we share when we're talking about sprints. And it's this idea that you've got sort of above the line and below the line thinking when you're planning any kind of design process. So your above the line thinking is the stuff that is kind of the narrative of your session, if you like. So you've got the sort of end goal or the desired outcome that you're trying to get out of the session, which is represented by the sort of pink target on the right-hand end there. And then you've got a series of stages that get you towards this. And you can think about those as kind of the chapters in the story of your design process. So it's what are the different stages that need to happen in order to get me towards that end outcome. All of the above the line thinking is in pretty general terms. It's thinking about the sort of broader types of outputs and decisions and insights that you need to gather at different stages. And the idea is that there are a range of different ways that you could actually go about achieving each of those things, but you're just thinking about what am I trying to achieve in broad terms when you're thinking about above the line. And then when you go below the line, that's when you start to get really specific about what kinds of activities and exercises and tools am I going to use to actually achieve the stuff that's happening above the line. So that's pretty abstract. To give you a sort of real world example, this is what a typical sprint process often looks like. So we run a whole lot of design sprints, as I said, in our work, and this is how we would typically structure a design sprint when we're planning it out. Across the top, above the line thinking, you've got a discovery, empathy, and research piece at the start. So that's understanding the challenge better by doing some research, by getting customer voice into the room and understanding what's going on from the point of view of the people we're designing for. Then you might be redefining the challenge to point out what part of this can we really focus on, coming up with a whole range of ideas through creative ideation, and then prototyping, making our idea real and testing that idea by getting feedback from the people that we're designing for. And hopefully by the end of it, we've then designed some kind of new solution. Again, whether that's a vision, a brand identity, a product, a service, whatever it might be. And then you can see below the line, there's a range of different kinds of techniques and tools that we might use to achieve this. So just on the left-hand side, discovery, empathy, and research, we would typically use things like user interviews, surveys, and desktop research. But the point of this kind of above the line versus below the line thinking is that you could scrap all of that below the line stuff and you could replace it with an entirely different set of sort of research and empathy tools, but you'd still be achieving the same thing in terms of your above the line thinking, which is gathering insights into the problem from the user's point of view. So the idea here is that you can be really flexible about the kinds of tools and techniques that you might use depending on your particular sprint and what particular tools and exercises are going to make sense for the people that are involved in your sprint. But typically for a design sprint, those sort of stages across the top are going to stay relatively similar. So that's kind of the broader 5-stage process that you go through in a design sprint. But then the way that you do it in terms of those specific activities might vary depending on how you're going to design it and how you're tailoring it to the needs of your particular team and what you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense? And are there any questions about this sort of above the line versus below the line framing in terms of design sprints? Feel free to come off mute and jump in because I can't see you all while I've got my screen shared. No questions? Explained it perfectly? Awesome. Oh, we've got a question from Alvin. Go for it.
Do you have to do all the below the line exercises or can you pick and choose which ones you do?
Yeah, great question. You definitely don't have to do all of them. So this is sort of a, what might be a 2-week or 3-week design sprint that we might spread out and spread into different stages that you can see on this screen. If you were doing a half-day design sprint, you might only do some really quick, rapid sort of methods. If you were doing a longer sort of 6-month sprint, that might be the sort of longer size that you can call a sprint, but you might be using even more than what's on the screen here. So the point is that, for depending on the kind of time you have, the kind of people that you're working with, the kind of purpose that you're trying to achieve, you might sub in and out different kinds of tools and activities that make sense for you.
All right, thanks.
All right, so the next thing that I'm going to invite you all to do is to take another piece of paper, to draw another line across it, and then to start thinking about what is the above the line narrative of your sprint, and then what tools and activities could you use to fill out your particular narrative. So I'll give you a chance to sort of think about those questions, and then I might bring this screen back up so that you can all see that one. As I said, the above the line narrative might be pretty similar, if not exactly the same for your sprint, though it might change a little if you're doing something like a vision sprint or sort of a kickoff sprint. You might have slightly different stages. But what I want you to think about is what's those above the line things? What are the sort of broader narrative of your sprint? And then what are the different specific activities and tools that you're going to use to achieve that stuff above the line? Again, I'll give you a couple of minutes to work on this individually, and then you'll have a chance to have a bit of a chat, and I'll shake the groups up a little bit again so that you can chat to some different people about this one. Let me know if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand as well. Go for it. Hey, I always say people are obviously having good conversations when you take a little while to come back from your breakout rooms. You get kicked out automatically instead of coming back manually. So hopefully some good chats happening in those rooms there. We don't have time for too much sharing, but did anyone want to quickly jump in and share one of the interesting things that came up in their conversation in their room?
I'll share, Matt. We just had a very brief chat there about, you know, the activities that you might include, but when you've got a diverse team that you're trying to get to collaborate on something, there's probably an element of in that below the line thinking, like setting up the psychological safety at some point for the group, so that if you are going to be quite combative about, you know, IT says this but HR says that, like making sure that everyone's able to really contribute fully, because particularly in that ideation phase, you don't want people to hold back. So making sure that it's a safe space for people to participate is really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. And that's probably not captured in the sort of, you know, 5-stage processes. Actually, there's stages in between and during all of those that are about sort of holding the space and making sure that you're setting it up right and bringing people into the room in the right ways and all of that sort of stuff as well. More of that.
I'm sure you do that, Matt. You do it beautifully.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, and that's probably another really interesting point as well, is around the sort of balance between efficiency and what you've called psychological safety there, and sort of democracy is almost another way of saying it. So in Jake Knapp's sort of original formulation, they say that each team should have a decider, which is sort of the person who is almost the project lead or something like that, so that when you get to those points where you can't get consensus, no one can make a decision, then the decider is able to just say, this is what we're going to do, and you can move forward. But on the other hand, that obviously involves sacrifices in terms of that sort of democratic decision making. So it's really thinking about how can we try and design structures to help people to sort of make sure everyone's voice is heard. And at the same time, we can still make decisions quickly and get through something that we can call a sprint, because it's nice and quick and we're actually getting to validated decisions quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You do need someone to, just because, you know, if you try and please everyone, you're going to please no one, basically. So
yeah, for sure. Bit of a tricky balance to strike there. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll share my screen again and I'll just sort of do the last little bit before we wrap up. So in terms of what to do after a sprint, reasonably sort of straightforward, as you would imagine. It's establishing really clear next steps based on what came out of the sprint, and that will depend on what came out of the sprint. So if you validated the idea, that might be about the next iteration. How do we improve it? How do we implement it? If you invalidated an idea, it might be around, all right, how do we go back to the drawing board, and what might the next sprint be on a different idea, if that's something that you're going to be embedding. Debriefing on both the outcomes of the process and then also the process itself can be really valuable. So actually thinking about, all right, how do we structure this sprint and did it work for us? What were the bits where we did have too much argument? What were the bits where we maybe didn't have enough and we jumped to conclusions too quickly and we should have discussed it a little bit more? And how can we sort of redesign it next time we do a sprint to make it work better for us and for our context? And then there's obviously the piece around starting to embed this sprint method in your working patterns as an organization, if that's something that you're interested in doing. So to talk a little bit more about that, sort of something that we point out here is this is where this idea of agile working comes in. So the difference here between a waterfall versus an agile method is that rather than doing sort of one great big project that you sort of go through each of the stages one by one, agile is about doing lots of little sprints that sort of connect to one another. So just like we were saying towards the start of the session, sometimes you need to actually break it up into smaller 1 or 2 day pieces of sort of shorter sprints, but then making sure that you're stitching those sprints together and working out how you can involve different teams in those. It might not always be the same group in every sprint, because some of it might be more relevant to IT, some of it might be more relevant to marketing or to the executive or whoever it might be. But starting to come up with a way of structuring your process of problem solving around these short sprints to actually validate ideas, rather than sort of committing to one giant big project and only finding out towards the end whether it's actually worked or not. And then this is sort of one of the examples of how SOMA have started to embed this sprint way of working with the design thinking process. So it's thinking about, all right, how can we actually have different sprints that sit within different parts of the design process? So in this example, we've got a discovery sprint, a define sprint, and a sprint, sorry, and a develop sprint. So thinking about these, like chunking it up into different parts of the design process that are focused on different things, whether that's gathering insights about the problem, redefining and sort of reframing the problem, and then developing ideas and sort of low fidelity prototypes. And then after each of those sprints, there's some sort of scrum or meeting that actually has particular stage gates, which tell you when you're allowed to move on to the next stage. So we need a certain number of creative ideas before we're allowed to move from this stage to the next stage, or we need a certain amount of validated insights from our users before we can move from discover to define, and those sorts of things. So setting yourself those stage gates can be really, really valuable in helping you to make this a really structured way of working, and help you to make sure that you've got what you need for the next stage before you move on. Because otherwise the risk of a sprint is that you get excited about the speed of it and it comes at the expense of the sort of depth and validated insights. So that is it for this session. The last thing that I wanted to do is super quickly give you a little rundown of the Design Doing Sprint program that we've just launched, which is an online interactive self-paced course that takes you through an entire design sprint from start to finish, working on your own design challenge and sort of guiding you either as an individual or as a team to do all of that work of gathering insights, redefining or reframing a problem, coming up with a lot of different ideas, prototyping and testing an idea, and then hopefully implementation at the end as well. So you'll be working through 7 different modules that have got all of those different stages of the design process. As you can see, you get to see plenty of more of my face and hear plenty of my voice. But there's 25 hours of content, lots of different videos, and a whole bunch of resources as well. So not just stuff that we've created, but also stuff that we've curated and sort of put in there. So there's heaps and heaps of follow-up readings and podcasts and videos and all sorts of things that you'll almost certainly never get through all of them, but there's lots of different rabbit holes to go down depending on which bit interests you the most. So at the moment, this is already, we've launched it and we've got launch pricing. It's about 70% off. So it's a huge discount, but I'll be sending you guys through an extra discount in the follow-up to this session as well. So if you're interested in checking that one out, please do. And we'd love to hear your feedback as well, because it's freshly launched. So we'd love to hear what you think of it. And then finally, what's coming up next is a systems thinking in design workshop. So that is the next one of our Skill Gym series, and you'll be seeing more information about that very soon as well. So look out for that coming to an inbox near you soon. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been awesome to work with you. I hope you've enjoyed the session and learned something about design sprints that you can take away and apply. And I hope we'll see you in another SOMA session soon. Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Right.
See you later.